Welcome back. She's the Globe and Mail blogger known as Nerd Girl, and in some ways the title fits. I've met few scientists with more passion about communicating the intricacies of science than Dr. Jennifer Gardy. She was co-host of a CBC science show entitled Project X and is currently working at the Genome Research Lab at the BC Centers for Disease Control. Jennifer Gardy joins me in studio. Welcome.
Hi, Peter. Thank you.
All right, so not to start this off as a confrontational interview, especially since we're friends, but
yeah.
I have to take issue with Nerd Girl. Because one of the issues about sort of public access to science, understanding science, and also education, kids wanting to go into science, is that there is this sense that it's nerdy and it's wonky and it's complicated. How do you break that barrier, especially when you call yourself Nerd Girl?
I didn't call myself
Okay.
Nerd Guy. If it was up to me, I'd call myself Awesome Science Girl. But the Globe was the one that gave me that moniker. They said they wanted a research blog, something that kind of focused on the life of, it started off as the life of a postdoctoral researcher, but I've gradually moved onwards and upwards in academia, so it's taken on a new direction. But at the time, they just wanted something that was about a grad student or postdoc researcher, and they said, let's call it Nerd Girl, so right to fit that. So I was kind of labeled myself as Nerd Girl.
But how do we deal with that sort of image of science?
You know, I think a large part of getting over that is putting people like me at the forefront of science communication. People that, you know, are...
Don't look like scientists.
Yeah, that don't look like scientists. You know, I'm really interested in fashion, music, just, you know, a hip lifestyle. And so I certainly don't think I fit the mold of the traditional scientist. And by showing young people that, you know, really a scientist can be anybody, I think that's probably the best way to start. And, you know, I personally would brand myself a bit of a nerd, but, you know, I embrace the term. Nerd is not a bad thing.
Right.
Maybe dork is a bad thing,
Right.
but nerd isn't a bad thing if you get into the semantics of it.
Well, one of the challenges is getting the public engaged. And when you look at something like the Large Hadron Collider in Europe, I mean, it's a $9 billion project that, as far as most people are concerned, anyone who's even paid some vague attention to it, is that it's this gigantic thing that smashes atoms into each other. Like, how is this justified?
Pretty much, yeah.
How is this a good idea?
Yeah.
So I think one of the ways they've sort of spun it is that it's a search for God. It's the search for this sort of mysterious God particle, this Higgs boson.
Higgs boson, yeah.
So first of all, explain to us what that is.
Oh yeah, the Higgs boson, it's quite interesting. There's this idea in the Standard Model, which is sort of the unified concept of physics. You know, it's started by Einstein, and it works in all of relativity, quantum mechanics, all that stuff. So the Higgs boson is something that is postulated to exist as part of the Standard Model, but nobody's actually discovered it yet.
So it's mathematically assumed to exist.
It's mathematically
sort of
assumed to
solves
exist.
the mathematical
it's
dilemmas.
It's basically the variable that makes all the equations in the Standard Model work. And the idea is that the Higgs boson makes up the Higgs field, which basically fills all of space, and it essentially gives mass to the other particles in the universe that are traveling through that Higgs field. So in that respect, I think the name the God particle that people gave to it is sort of a misnomer, and you know, it's a particle that gives mass to other particles. It's probably more accurately called the McDonald's particle or something for that reason, but it's one of these sort of fundamental mysteries that if we were to actually find it, would really snap a lot of things into place, and I think that's really attracted people to the LHC project, and also this whole idea that this thing is creating black holes. I mean, it's pretty cool.
Right.
And the fact that, you know, there's another nerd that doesn't really seem to be a nerd as one of the big cheerleaders of the LHC, it's Brian Cox. He's a physicist. If you've ever watched any documentaries about the Large Hadron Collider, he's one of the guys that's featured quite often. He's got this mop of fantastic hair, and he used to be the keyboard player in a pop group in the 80s in the UK. So you've got this sort of rock star who rides around the LHC on a Segway telling people how cool it is. So it's been really easy to popularize it when you've got somebody like that on your team.
But, you know, some people will argue that this is so distant from our average lives. I mean, look, if you don't follow hockey, then you probably don't know that, you know, Vancouver played the Kings the other day, and you don't know that the Stanley Cup playoffs are going on. It's sort of outside of your interest. There's lots of things out there that some people are really passionate about, but don't affect other people's lives. Why should we care about something like the collider in Europe?
I think everybody sort of, they find their own little bit of science that they like to latch onto. You know, there are some people that find the Large Hadron Collider totally fascinating, but for other people, they're a lot more interested in something like, you know, treating malaria in the developed world, or understanding how tornadoes form. You know, Storm Chasers is a huge show on one of the networks down in the States, and it's all science. It's weather geeks. It's meteorological nerds going out there in SUVs chasing tornadoes, and it's all science, but you know, it's got this action-packed element to it that just really attract people. So I think there's something for everybody in science. You know, for some it might be particle physics, for some it might be tornadoes. For me, it's, you know, genomics and infectious disease, but we all have our thing that we really are passionate about.
Well, let's talk about genomics and infectious disease. I think did you work on H1N1?
Yes, we do.
So when that broke out, some people have described it as sort of the first open source disease out there, because all these scientists all over really the world work together and shared information, as opposed to sort of keeping it and publishing it when they can. How did that come about?
It was really fantastic. I think it's sort of it's a combination of new technologies and new attitudes towards those technologies. So when you're studying an infectious disease, first of all, you have to have the technological platforms that enable you to understand the bug itself really quickly. So in a lot of cases, that's DNA sequencing. So we've got the tools now where we can isolate some influenza virus, essentially chuck it in a box, and you know, an hour or so later, get its full genome sequence out. I mean, there's some pretty cool stuff that we can do. So there's a combination of being able to generate the data, and then scientists today, the people that are, you know, really doing these genomics experiments, are people of my vintage, and we grew up with file sharing. We grew up with things like the Napster download service, or going on bulletin boards when we were kids and, you know, trading computer game files over the internet. So we've got this real belief that I think is quite strongly held amongst scientists of my generation, and even a lot of scientists of the older generation, that information really does want to be free, and information should be shared. It shouldn't be locked away in journals. It shouldn't be restricted to only institutions and groups that can afford access to those journals. So people were really open in releasing their sequence data and coming up with new ways of sharing analyses and sharing results of those analyses, basically in real time, recognizing that, you know, this was a pandemic, this was a global threat. So it made no sense to work on your own, completely isolated and trying to pursue your own research goal, when really, you know, there were lives at stake worldwide. So people just banded together, and I think it was really fantastic. I mean, just compared to the SARS pandemic a little while ago, that was kind of our first go around with a really major threat as far as infectious diseases go.
Let me stop you there, because we have to take a quick break. But when we come back, we'll talk about how that open source model actually saved lives. Back with Jennifer Gardy after this short break.